The waters of the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most vital maritime choke points, have once again become the center of a dangerous standoff. In a single stark social media post, President Donald Trump ordered U.S. naval forces to take lethal action against small boats he accused of placing mines in the channel, and he vowed to dramatically increase mine-sweeping operations. He said, "I have ordered the United States Navy to shoot and kill any boat, small boats though they may be, that is putting mines in the waters of the Strait of Hormuz. There is to be no hesitation," and added that our minesweepers are clearing the strait right now, and that he was tripling up those efforts. That declaration came as U.S. forces carried out a maritime interdiction of a tanker linked to Iranian oil shipments, a stateless vessel identified by U.S. forces as the MT Majestic X. Far from the strait itself in the Indian Ocean, the interdiction is part of an enforcement campaign aimed at curbing a shadow fleet that moves sanctioned Iranian crude around the globe. In response, Iranian naval units have been operating aggressively in and around the strait, and state-affiliated forces announced the seizure of 2 cargo ships accused of operating without the required authorizations. The timing is acute. Diplomats in Islamabad, Pakistani mediators who have been shepherding ceasefire talks, were awaiting a response from Tehran to a proposed peace plan when the latest naval actions unfolded. The United States had earlier extended a ceasefire, a pause designed to give Iran time to return with a unified proposal, but with ships being seized, tankers interdicted, and the U.S.'s president publicly ordering lethal force against vessels suspected of laying mines, the fragile equilibrium that underpinned that pause is under severe strain. To understand how dangerous this moment is, it helps to recall what the Strait of Hormuz represents. It is the gateway between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. Roughly 1/5 of all seaborne oil trade moves through those waters. Any disruption, whether from mines, fast attack boats, or outright blockade, can reverberate across global markets, fuel supply chains, and geopolitical calculations. That is why the presence of U.S. warships, mine countermeasure vessels, and the very visible interdiction of oil tankers have such immediate consequences. From a military perspective, laying mines is a classic asymmetric tactic. Mines are cheap, persistent, and indiscriminate. They can deny access or slow traffic for months. They are also difficult and dangerous to clear. Mine countermeasure operations require specialized vessels, remotely operated systems, and time. Senior officials briefed members of Congress in a closed session and were told that fully clearing the Strait of mines, especially if fields are extensive or facilities continue, could take months. That is an operational reality no political promise can change. Overnight. On the diplomatic side, Pakistan has been quietly playing the role of intermediary. Islamabad's envoys had been pushing Tehran to consolidate a response to an extended ceasefire proposal, attempting to bridge competing internal Iranian factions and to provide a pathway back to negotiations. The seizure of vessels in the strait and the unilateral interdiction of tankers have complicated that task. Mediators often rely on the appearance of calm, a credible lull in kinetic activity to persuade reluctant parties to engage. When that stillness is punctured by raids, seizures, and public vows of lethal force, the space for diplomacy narrows. The legal and strategic implications of a presidential order to shoot and kill are immediate and thorny. Under international law, states have the right to defend their territorial waters and to interdict vessels engaged in unlawful activity, but the use of lethal force at sea is bound by rules of engagement, the law of armed conflict, and long-standing maritime practice. Orders that emphasize no hesitation risk producing tragic mistakes, misidentification of a fishing boat as a mine-laying craft, or the loss of civilian life during a tense encounter. Even short, high-risk engagements in a narrow strait can rapidly escalate into a broader clash between navies. Operational commanders on the scene face a difficult calculus: how to distinguish between a fishing vessel, a commercial launch, and a hostile fast attack boat operating in a gray zone where civilian and military activity mix. How to balance the imperative of keeping global commerce moving against the risk of opening fire and triggering reprisals. For sailors and Marines, the answer requires precise intelligence, careful rules of engagement, and discipline at every level, from the captain on the bridge to the commanders who issue the order. The interdiction of the MT Majestic X and related boardings of other tankers alleged to be part of Iran's shadow fleet demonstrates how the United States has chosen to expand enforcement beyond the strait itself. U.S. Central Command has made clear that it views the interdictions as lawful efforts to enforce sanctions and to prevent the financing of military operations. But Iran and its proxies see the measures differently, as aggression, a violation of maritime freedom, and a direct assault on their economic lifelines. That divergence in narratives makes the likelihood of tit-for-tat actions far higher. Inside the Pentagon, the crisis has produced another ripple, a sudden change in leadership. The Secretary of the Navy, John Phelan, was removed from his post in the midst of the standoff. The Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, announced the departure as an immediate move, citing disagreements over policy and performance amid the broader strategy to confront Iran. High-level personnel shifts at the heart of defense leadership, especially during active operations, send their own signal about internal fracturing, political priorities, and the stress that prolonged conflict places on institutions. For global markets, the consequences are immediate. Oil prices respond reflexively to any perceived threat to supply. Shipping insurers reprice risk for transits through the Gulf and adjacent seas. Companies reroute cargoes at added cost and delay to avoid a dangerous passage. For countries dependent on energy flows from the region, many of which are not directly involved in the conflict, the economic fallout arrives fast. Central banks, traders, and industrial planners watch the Strait with a near constant camera because even a single mined lane can inject volatility into futures markets and push up prices at the pump for consumers thousands of miles away. From a geopolitical lens, the crisis also reshapes alliances and tests the patience of partners. Some U.S. allies support firm action to keep the Strait open. Others urge restraint, warning that a broader war would be catastrophe. Regional powers, meanwhile, must calculate their own responses, whether to back Iran to stay neutral or to cooperate with coalition patrols. The presence of multinational merchant shipping complicates any unilateral solution. When cargoes and crews from dozens of nations are at risk, the diplomatic pressure to de-escalate grows intense, and it is precisely that pressure that mediators had been trying to harness. There are a number of plausible pathways forward, each with its own risks. One is de-escalation through renewed managed diplomacy, a concrete time-bound proposal from Tehran, accepted by mediators, followed by verifiable steps to demine key lanes and to release seized vessels. That track depends on Tehran finding consensus internally and on the United States and its partners offering credible assurances that enforcement will ease in exchange for compliance. Another pathway is a protracted maritime enforcement campaign in which interdictions and seizures continue in the U.S. and allied navies attempt to keep commerce flowing by force. That route risks asymmetric retaliation, such as additional mine-laying, maritime harassment, or even strikes on shipping. A less discussed but highly consequential option is unilateral escalation by miscalculation. In a narrow strait, a single misfired round, a destroyed small craft with civilians aboard, or a botched boarding can inflame public opinion and harden positions on both sides. Leaders who promise to keep a ceasefire can find themselves boxed into revenge-fueled policies. That is the danger of high-profile, emotionally charged public statements that place officials and sailors on a razor's edge. The human dimension must not be lost in these strategic calculations. Merchant mariners, many of them from developing countries, face the real fear of mines and fast boat attacks. Sailors tasked with boarding suspect vessels are operating under intense stress, knowing that any mistake can cost lives. Diplomats working late into the night in Islamabad, Tehran, and Washington are trying to thread a needle to translate vague promises into enforceable, verifiable commitments. So what should viewers watching this unfold expect next? First, watch the diplomacy. Pakistani mediators, if they can extract a clear, credible response from Tehran, may provide the best short-term chance to steady the waters. Second, watch enforcement patterns, whether U.S. interdictions continue to expand beyond the Gulf or whether there is a pause while negotiators speak. Third, look for international pressure, statements from Gulf states, from EU capitals, and from Asia that either prod Tehran to restrain its forces or prod Washington to temper immediate kinetic responses. And finally, watch for unilateral acts that risk escalation, fresh seizures, new mine incidents, or an exchange of fire at sea. In the background of every decision is the same hard truth: the Strait of Hormuz cannot be secured by bravado alone. It requires intelligence, sustained mine countermeasure capability, diplomatic bandwidth, and above all, restraint. Mine clearing is painstaking work. It is incremental and hazardous. Boarding suspect vessels is risky. Employing lethal force in a busy commercial waterway is a last resort, not an off-the-cuff proclamation. President Trump's declaration, the word shoot and kill, has shifted the conversation from abstract strategy to immediate operational peril. It signals a willingness to use force and in doing so raises the stakes for those on all sides of the conflict. The removal of the Navy Secretary underlines the internal pressures and political calculations at play in Washington. The interdiction of tankers and the seizure of cargo ships underscore the economic stakes. And Pakistan's attempt at mediation, if successful, remains a slender thread that could pull a wider region back from the brink. In the days ahead, the most urgent tasks are clear. First, de-escalate, Immediate risk to civilian shipping through a combination of transparent rules of engagement, rapid mine clearing, prioritization of commercial lanes, and robust communication channels between navies. Second, give diplomacy a chance. Create a time-limited, verifiable process for Iran to respond to the peace proposal without the shadow of immediate kinetic reprisals. Third, reassure the global community, especially countries whose ships and citizens transit the Strait, that deliberate steps are being taken to minimize harm and to restore normal commercial traffic. At stake is more than the passage of oil tankers. The choices made now will affect regional stability, global markets, and the lives of those who labor at sea. They will also test the capacity of states, leaders, and institutions to resolve a crisis that cannot be fixed by a single speech or a single interdiction. If history is any guide, the path away from escalation will be narrow, imperfect, and politically costly. But it is also the only realistic route to prevent the temporary closure of a narrow waterway from becoming the opening act of a much wider conflict. For those keeping watch, the message is both urgent and simple. The world is watching the Strait of Hormuz, and every action, every boarding, every seizure, every public order to shoot and kill reverberates far beyond the waves. The imperative now is to turn talk of force into disciplined, lawful action while giving diplomacy its best possible chance to hold. The alternative is a deeper confrontation that will be far harder to control and far more damaging to the very people leaders claim they are protecting.